Howdy, folks, and welcome to Saddle and Sixkin. We're fixin' to share a story that'll take you back to a time when the West was wild, and justice was a whole lot like a tumbleweed, rollin' wherever the wind blew it. This ain't your average shoot 'em up. This is a tale of grit, survival, and a whole lot of heart. If you're ready for a story that'll stick with you longer than a prairie sunset, then stick around and give us a like or subscribe, won't you? Spring in Redbute, Colorado Territory, 1884. Imagine the kind of mud that clings to your boots like a preacher's sermon, and a wind whisperin' secrets louder than any gossipin' townswoman. Gareth Langston, a man worn down like an old saddle, drove his weather-beaten buggy into town. Trailing 6 months of silence and dust, Bay, the mayor, mule, was pullin' it. He was about as spooked and tired of this journey as Gareth himself was. Now, folks around those parts whispered that Gareth had become part ghost, part madman, lettin, fences rot and cattle wander, all to avoid speakin' to another soul. He carved out a livin' on the edge of Redbute, where the main road petered out, and the hard land began. Some called it Langston's Bluff. Others just figured it was too damn far out there. Finally, he stopped outside the Crooked Lantern, a saloon less known for its lightin and more for the trouble that stumbled beneath its ragged sign. What do you think he's doing there? Is he looking for trouble, or is trouble looking for him? Inside, the air hung thick with whiskey sweat, cigar smoke, and laughter that usually ended with a sigh of regret. The piano was broken, the bar sticky enough to trap flies, and poker chips rattled like distant warning bells. Gareth pushed through the batwing doors, and the sound stopped. Silence dropped heavier than a banker's frown. Even Doc Wendell, who'd once pulled a bullet from Gareth's thigh without a drop of whiskey or a word of complaint, looked down. Seems the town remembered a thing or two and knew when to stay quiet. Gareth nodded to the barkeep, a stout fellow with one good eye and one worse memory, and headed to the back poker table, the seat where trouble liked to settle, decked out in velvet and flashin' gold teeth. There sat Marlon Glay, the self-proclaimed mining magnate of the Colorado hills. His cheeks were flushed red from cheap bourbon and arrogance. What do you suppose Gareth is planning? Is this about money, or is there something more at stake here? Take a moment to give us a like or subscribe, won't you? Yes, men, flush-faced and leering, stood behind him. Women across the room laughed softly, but not enough to drown out the tension. Looks like a man come to lose, Marlon drawled, waving his cards around with flaring nostrils, or maybe to win. If God's got a twisted sense of humor tonight. Gareth didn't answer. He just sat down, tossed a roll of crumpled bills onto the table. Enough to make the room shift its weight. Marlon raised a gold-trimmed eyebrow and called for the dealer with a sneer. 5-card stud. No wilds, no mercy. Gareth played like a man who didn't give a damn. Folding hands, sippin' water while others drowned in whiskey. But as midnight crawled closer, the stakes rose higher. Marlon's chip pile towered, his voice grew louder and cockier, until he slammed a hefty pocket watch on the table. One last hand, he slurred. All or nothing. Gareth asked, and what's your stake, Marlon? Low and steady. Marlon answered, his devilish grin cracked wider. He glanced toward the stairs and snapped his fingers. Now what is Marlon going to do? Is there anything he wouldn't stake? A burly man in suspenders appeared, dragging a woman in shadow behind him. The room fell silent. She was barefoot, her dress torn and stained, chestnut hair matted and tangled. Her belly was obvious, at least 6 months along. She didn't cry, didn't beg, just stared straight ahead, her expression hollow, like she'd already made peace with the hell behind and the hell ahead. My collateral, Marlon announced like he was off-airin' a livestock trade. Woman's got no name, no kin, no home, just a mouth to feed. But she's yours if you win. Might make a fine cook or cleaner till the brat comes anyway. Silence sliced through the room like a knife. Gareth looked at the woman, then at the cards, then back at Marlon. Deal, he said. Lights flickered. Cards slapped the table like pistol shots. Is Gareth throwing his life away to save a woman he doesn't even know? What could possibly make him risk it all? Gareth's hand. 2 pair, aces and eights. Marlon grinned, then revealed 3 kings. Looks like, Marlon started, until the dealer broke in. Miss Deal, he said quietly. You swapped cards. What you calling me, a cheat? Marlon roared. I call what I see, the dealer replied, his eyes unflinching. The room shifted. No one dared challenge Gareth when the person accusing looked honest and hard. Gareth stood up slowly. You cheated, he said. You lose. Marlon's fist tightened, but his cronies edged back. No one in Redbute wanted to test Gareth Langston with a 6-shooter still in reach. The woman remained, perched in silence, her expression steady. Gareth knelt down before her. You got a name? He asked. Odessa, she said, her voice rough as gravel but calm. 27. Due in 3 months, give or take. They'll come for me. And when they do, don't let them take the baby. Now that things are getting interesting, why don't you give us a like or subscribe? She turned and walked out, barefoot, leaving cold impressions tattooed into the warped floorboards. Gareth followed her out. The buggy waited. She climbed in, silent. Gareth stood beside the mayor. No one stopped them. Not a soul dared. By the time they reached Langston's Bluff, the moon was low, and the wind was brutal. He led her to the spare room, the one that still smelled of pine and regret. She didn't thank him, just sat on the cot and stared out the window. That night, neither of them slept. The walls between them were as thin as guilt. In the dark, he heard her whisper in her sleep. The mine, the ledger, blood on the stairs. He stared at the ceiling, his hand resting on his revolver. Is Gareth starting to care about this woman? What will become of him? Morning came with whispers in town. Langston brought something back from the Crooked Lantern. Some say she's cursed. Some say she belongs to Bar Eric. The name landed in the town's memory like cold soot on snow. Bar Eric, a man whose influence spread deeper than his mine shafts. Days passed. Odessa tended the fire, cooked, swept, and spoke little, but each night, her dreams spilled out in hushed terrors. And each morning, Gareth felt farther from rest and closer to something darker, dangerous, and impossible to turn away from. Are they already in over their heads? The mornings out at Langston's Bluff were slow and quiet, the kind of quiet that had teeth. Fog rolled in over the pasture like spilled milk, and the only sounds were creaking wood and the low rumble of Gareth's milk cow complaining about the cold. It had been 3 days since the poker game. Odessa hadn't said much. She took to chores without asking. She swept the porch, stoked the stove, boiled beans, and even folded Gareth's shirts, even though he never asked her to. Not once did she mention the baby growing in her belly, nor did she show fear about the night terrors that woke her screaming, her hands gripping the bedsheets like a rope hanging off a cliff. Gareth didn't press. He wasn't the kind to pry open a door that wasn't his. What kind of secrets are they both hiding? Could it destroy them? But the silence around Odessa wasn't the kind that settled. It was the kind that swirled. He noticed the way she avoided mirrors and how she always kept a hand on her belly, like shielding it from some ghost only she could see. She spoke little and ate less. And when Gareth finally asked her why she hadn't left yet, she just looked out toward the ridge and said, "Few more days." That was all. That night, Gareth stepped outside with a mug of chicory coffee and a blanket over his shoulders. The wind whispered secrets through the cottonwoods. He lit a cigarette, leaned against the rail, and listened to the night breathe. Then he heard it, a soft clatter, metal against wood. He moved toward the barn, quiet as snowfall. Inside, Odessa stood at the feed table. She hadn't noticed him. Her back was to him, her shoulders tight, hands digging through the satchel she'd carried since that first night. Gareth cleared his throat. She spun around, eyes wide, something clenched tight in her hand. Didn't mean to startle you, he said, stepping into the lantern light. Couldn't sleep. Neither could she. That was obvious. What's that? He asked, motioning to her hand. Odessa hesitated. Then, slowly, she opened her fingers. It was a small leather book, weather-worn. The corners were frayed, and the spine was held together with twine. Give us a like or subscribe for more great Western tales. It's a small leather book. Weather-worn. The corners frayed, the spine held together with twine. Nothing remarkable about it until he saw the initials branded faintly on the back cover. See, Red Hollow Mining Company. Gareth's jaw tightened. Odessa didn't speak, but she handed the book to him. Don't ask me why I kept it, she said. Just read. He did. The ledger was crude, handwritten, and careful rows, names, dates, payment amounts, strange symbols in the margins. Some names he recognized, local ranchers, town officials, even Sheriff Coyle, others he didn't. Then came the section labeled H product. Each entry listed dates, weights, transport routes, and codes that made Gareth's gut twist. Some of the product weighed less than 70 pounds. A few were marked with X's. There was one entry circled in red pencil. Ow 6.5 moss. Transfer cancelled. Reassigned to local asset. Gareth closed the book slowly. You kept the ledger, he said. You were part of it. I wrote the numbers, Odessa replied, her voice flat. Didn't know what they meant at first. Thought it was or freight. Then I asked too many questions. She turned slightly, brushing her hair aside. That's when Gareth saw it. A pale scar just below her hairline, shaped like a cross. Not a tattoo, a brand. Red Hollow, he muttered. They don't just fire you, she said. They make you disappear. Gareth's stomach churned. And the baby? Odessa met his eyes. Bar Eric. Silence thickened the air. She went on, soft but sharp. He thinks I'm dead. They all do. Sent me to reassignment up north. One of the handlers drank too much and got sloppy. I ran. I've been running ever since. Gareth looked down at the book in his hand. This ledger, he began. Could bury them. She finished, if it got to the right person, but it hasn't. No, because I don't know who the right person is. And because if Bar Eric finds out I'm alive, he'll come for the baby. She stepped closer then, her voice a whisper of thunder. He said once in that smug, drunk voice of his, better the bastard die than live broken and dirt. I believed him. Gareth didn't flinch. He'd heard men say worse, done worse once. But something shifted inside him, subtle and strange, like a fence post leaning just before the wind takes it. He handed the ledger back to her. I reckon you got more guts than half this town, he said. You plan to keep running? Odessa shook her head. Not anymore. Then you'd better sleep with a pistol close. She cracked the smallest of smiles. Already do. Back inside, Gareth sat at the edge of his bed, boots still on, rifle across his knees. Odessa's words echoed in his head like hoofbeats. I'd rather see it dead than let it live poor. It wasn't just a threat, it was a vow. The kind of vow a man like Bar Eric had the power and cruelty to make real. By sunrise, Gareth had made a decision. She wasn't just another poker debt, she was bait in a trap too big to see yet, and he'd just stepped right into it. But maybe, just maybe, he'd spring it first. Redbute didn't just hum with gossip anymore, it growled. Within days of Gareth Langston's return to town, whispers twisted into warnings, and the locals who once gave him space now crossed the street to avoid him entirely. Something foul had settled over the town like a dust storm on the rise, and everyone could feel it. Back at the ranch, Gareth sat at the kitchen table with a pot of black coffee. The ledger was open before him, and a kerosene lamp burned low. His hands were calloused and calm, but his eyes were as sharp as boot knives. He flipped through the pages again, slower this time, counting names. Some scrolled, some underlined, some marked with symbols he couldn't decipher: Sheriff J.D. Coyle, Pastor Wilmer Teague, Councilman Reeve, all logged under dates and dollar signs, each tied to something called our transfer credits. Odessa watched from the doorway, arms folded over her belly, her face pale in the lamp's glow. "They were all bought," she said. "Bar Eric paid them to look the other way at the shipments, the labor, the disappearances." Gareth nodded. "How many more names like these?" She glanced away. "Enough to burn this whole town to ash." That's when the front gate creaked. By the time Gareth stepped onto the porch, a rider was already dismounting, tall, lean, dusty from the trail. A wide-brimmed hat, long coat, rifle slung low. What will happen now? Gareth raised his own weapon just enough to make the man think twice. "Easy there, Langston," the man called. "It's Knox." Gareth blinked, then lowered his gun barely. "Knox Tillman," Gareth muttered. "Ain't seen you since the Sandoval job. That was 9 years and 2 bullet holes ago." Knox grinned. "Mind if I step inside? Got something you'll want to hear." Over strong coffee and stronger silence, Knox leaned in. "There's a price on her," he said, glancing toward the hallway where Odessa had disappeared. $2,000. Dead or alive? Gareth's fists clenched around his cup. "Who posted it?" Knox shrugged. "Not officially. Words being passed through saloon mouths and backroom dealers. But everyone knows who wants her back. Bar Eric or someone working for him? Doesn't matter. There's bounty boys already sniffing around, and some don't care much for rules." Gareth nodded once, then stood. "This is it. What will he do?" He spent the next 6 hours reinforcing the barn doors, nailing fresh planks across the windows, laying caltrops in the brush beside the creek, and greasing the hinges of the old storm cellar. He didn't speak much, and Odessa didn't ask. That night, with the stars buried under storm clouds, Gareth barely slept. His Winchester stayed by the bed, one shell in the chamber. The horses stirred in the corral, uneasy. At 2 a.m., the dogs started barking. By the time Gareth reached the front door, lantern in hand, he saw movement near the woodshed, a shadow slipping around the side. He didn't call out. He didn't warn. He just aimed and fired. The crack of the rifle split the night, followed by a scream and the sound of someone hitting the ground hard. Gareth moved in, boots crunching gravel, the barrel of his Winchester hot and ready. The man was curled up against the shed, holding his gut. Blood soaked his shirt, and his revolver lay half buried in the dirt. "Who sent you?" Gareth asked, his voice like sandpaper. The man groaned, his eyes wild. "Bar Eric sends his regards." Gareth raised the rifle, then paused. "You tell him," he said. "Next time, he better send 2. The man passed out before he could reply. By dawn, Odessa had packed a small bag and was sitting on the porch steps, her eyes wide and haunted. "What will become of Odessa?" "He found me," she whispered. "He always does." "He found the ranch," Gareth corrected. "Not you. That's different." But she didn't look convinced, and neither was he. That day, Gareth installed spike boards under the front steps, reinforced the chimney with iron bars, and buried a second rifle in the woodshed floor. He cut brush to blind the pasture and trained the dogs to bark twice if they saw movement at night. Odessa helped when she could, despite her growing belly, but every step, every whisper, reminded him that the clock was ticking. She was due in less than a month. "Maybe I should leave," she said one afternoon while stacking firewood. "Go farther. Take the ledger and run." Gareth didn't even look up. Running ain't the answer. Bar Eric don't want the ledger. He wants you silent forever. She swallowed hard. Then who do we turn to? Gareth stood there for a long time, staring off toward the distant ridge where the sky met pine and memory. There's one man, he said finally. Only one who ever said no to Bar Eric and lived to tell it. Who? Sheriff Coyle. Odessa blinked. I thought he was part of this. He was, Gareth said, maybe still is, but he's got his own ghosts, and if I know J. Coyle, they ain't quiet ones. That night, Gareth saddled his mare, left Odessa with a shotgun and a flask of water, told her to sleep with the dogs inside, and to shoot first, not ask, then he rode out into the dark, toward Redbute, toward the law, or what was left of it. Redbute didn't sleep much anymore. The wind had turned colder that night, sharp and biting, like something was comin' down off the mountains with claws. Gareth Langston rode slow through back alleys and half-lit streets, keepin' to the shadows, his hat brim low. The sheriff's office sat crooked at the edge of town like an old tooth left to rot. It once stood proud, with whitewashed walls, iron cell doors, and a star that meant something. Now, the paint peeled, the window was cracked, and the only thing that glimmered was the bottle of rye in Sheriff Coyle's hand. Gareth dismounted, tied the mare loosely, and stepped up the 3 rickety steps. He didn't bother knocking, he just walked in. Sheriff J.D. Coyle sat behind his desk, boots up, a badge askew on a tobacco-stained vest. His hair was thinner, and his gut rounder, but his eyes, gray and tired, still held the ghosts of better days. Langston, he rasped without looking up. Figured it was either you or a bullet with my name on it. Maybe both, Gareth said, closing the door behind him. You still carry one in the chamber. Coyle grunted. Ain't needed it. Most trouble don't bother with talking anymore. Gareth stepped closer. I need your help. Coyle finally looked up. His eyes scanned Gareth's face like a man measuring the distance to a noose. That about the girl? She's not just a girl, and she's not just pregnant. No, Coyle muttered. She's bait. Gareth nodded once. Coyle stood up, groaned at the weight in his knees, and limped to the cabinet. He poured himself another drink, offered none. You always knew what Red Hollow was, Gareth said. You just never said. I said plenty, Coyle muttered. Back when it mattered. Nobody listened. Got me reassigned. Silenced. And the ledger? That made Coyle stop. His hand trembled slightly as he reached into a drawer behind the desk, then pulled out a battered envelope sealed with twine. He tossed it onto the table between them. I kept a copy, he said. From an investigation I opened last year. Never made it past the mayor's office. 3 weeks later, 2 witnesses vanished. My deputy quit. My wife left. I took to drink. Gareth opened the envelope. Inside were scanned pages, notations identical to those in Odessa's book, the same initials, the same payoffs. But this copy included something else, a list of coded names. And beneath one, a hastily scribbled note, I'll reassign to Bareric's private cabin. 6 months pregnant. Considered asset risk. She was marked, Coyle said. Not just as leverage, as a liability. And you sat on this. I didn't have the guns or the backing. What I had was a badge and a lot of dead ends. Gareth leaned in. I've got the original. Odessa's ledger. Coyle blinked. You're sitting on a bomb. No, Gareth corrected. I'm sitting on a fuse. I just need someone to light it. Coyle scratched his jaw. There's a reporter, Alice Ryman, Denver Tribune. Been sniffin' around about illegal indenture. She's looking for names. Proof. Gareth nodded. Get it to her. You write it out or you stay here and die alongside the rest of us when Bar Eric finds out. Just then, the shot through the skylight. Another through the window. What happened? What will come of it? At that moment a window shattered, and Coil's eyes widened. Blood bloomed across his chest. The bullet came from above, through the skylight, silent and clean, meant to kill without show. Gareth dove low, yanked his revolver, and rolled behind the desk. Another shot blasted the top shelf to splinters. Glass rained down. Coil gurgled, his hand clutching his ribs, his eyes wide and fading fast. "Roof," he gasped. "Shooter." Gareth kicked open the back door and slipped into the alley, heart hammering, the envelope clutched tight against his chest. Another shot echoed from the roofline, missing him by inches. He sprinted down the alley, bullets pinging off brick and dust rising like smoke. His mare was waitin', bless her, she didn't spook. Gareth swung up, spurred hard, and vanished into the night, the wind screamin' past his ears. He didn't look back, didn't have to. Blood was already dryin' on his shirt. Coil's blood. The kind of stain that didn't wash out. He rode through the dark like a ghost on fire, trees blurring past, the trail twisting, the world narrowing down to hooves, heartbeats, and the voice in his head. Odessa can't wind up in the dirt again. By the time the sun cracked over the ridgeline, Gareth was home. He dismounted slow, his shoulders aching, his throat raw. Odessa was on the porch, a shotgun in her hand, her belly wrapped tight in a wool shawl. She looked at the blood on his shirt. Give us a like and subscribe for some more great Western tales. We hope you enjoyed this one. She didn't ask. He handed her the envelope. "Coil's gone," he said. "But we've got our copy." Her hands trembled as she took it. "And now," she whispered. Gareth looked out toward the hills. "Now we make noise." The old trail into Red Hollow Pass twisted through pines and shale, barely wide enough for a wagon. It hadn't seen much use since the war, and that was just how Gareth wanted it. Tucked deep in the foothills, behind a line of jagged rock that once marked the edge of his father's land, sat a hidden grove, quiet and forgotten. The trees leaned low like whispering sentinels, and a dry creek bed curled through it like a scar. In the center stood a cabin, or what was left of one. Its roof was patched with tarpaulin, its walls shored up with hay bales and rusted nails. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Odessa lay inside on a cot made of old saddle blankets, sweat beading on her brow. The fire crackled low in the stone hearth. Outside, the wind howled like a pack of coyotes, and the rain began a slow, steady tap against the canvas roof. She was early, too early. Gareth knelt beside her, soaked from head to boot heel. He laid his palm on her stomach, then pressed her hand into his. "You're strong," he said. "And you ain't alone." Odessa bit down on a scream. "He's coming," she gasped. "I can feel it." Gareth stood, shoved his rifle into a saddlebag, and grabbed the lantern. "So are they." He was right. Not an hour later, the dogs barked in the trees. Horses snorted. Leather creaked. 3 riders came through the trees without torches, shadows in the storm. They dismounted just beyond the clearing, their boots splashing in the wet clay. Gareth watched from the loft window, his breath fogging the glass. He recognized one of them, Boone Harden, a bounty man who'd once shot his own cousin for a higher share. They moved slow, circling. "Odessa Wayne," one shouted. "You hand her over and maybe you keep your skin. We only want the girl." Gareth didn't answer. He'd already laid traps at the south bend of the creek and stretched wire across the rear slope. Instead, he lit a lantern, placed it in the window, and vanished into the shadows. The first trap snapped an ankle. The second sent a man tumbling into the firewood pit. The third, Gareth's rifle, barked once and dropped the third man mid-charge. Not a kill, but enough to send the others ducking for cover behind the shed. Inside, Odessa cried out, not from fear, but from labor. The contractions had come hard and fast, and there was no time left for planning. Gareth rushed in, blood on his sleeves, his hands shaking as he boiled water and laid out rags. He'd never delivered a child, but he'd stitched wounds in the field, reset bones, and pulled lead out of flesh. "I can do this." He pushed to Odessa. "You got this, Odessa." She did. By the time the firelight flickered low and the rain turned to sleet, the child came into the world, slick, silent, and staring. He didn't cry, just looked up at Gareth with wide, dark eyes, not terrified, not confused, just watching. Odessa gasped. "Why isn't he crying?" Gareth wrapped the boy in a dry cloth, cleaned his face, then leaned down close. "He's breathing. Just quiet." The baby blinked. "Already got his mother's eyes," Gareth murmured. Odessa didn't correct him. Then a roar outside. "You got 5 seconds, Langston. Bring her out or we burn the place down." Gareth held the baby tighter, the door rattled, and flames licked at the corners of the cabin. They'd set fire to the north wall. Odessa struggled to her feet. "Give them the ledger," she said, her breath ragged. "Maybe they'll let him live." "They won't," Gareth said. "You know they won't." Then he moved. He crossed the cabin, kicked aside the stove plate, and dragged back a thick plank. Beneath it, dirt, a few stones, and the dark mouth of a tunnel. "What is that?" Odessa asked. "My father's escape hole," Gareth said. "He dug it when the war came too close. Leads to the creek bed." He helped Odessa down first, then lowered the baby into her arms. "You crawl," he said. "Stay low. Don't stop." "What about you?" Gareth smiled faintly. "Just a little misdirection." He grabbed the lantern, tossed it across the room, and it shattered in a blaze. Then he wrapped his coat around the cot, propped it up, and shoved it against the burning door like a decoy. The baby didn't cry. As the flames climbed higher, Gareth dropped into the tunnel, pulled the trap door shut above him, and vanished into dirt and smoke. They crawled for 10 minutes, their hands raw, their lungs burning, until the tunnel opened into the dry creek bed, where pale moonlight cut through the clouds. Odessa emerged first, covered in soot. The baby was pressed tight to her chest. Gareth followed, his rifle slung across his back, his face streaked with ash. Behind them, the cabin erupted. Flames lit the trees in angry orange. The bounty hunters hooped and cursed, too late to realize they'd been tricked. Odessa looked back at the fire. "Everything's gone," she whispered. Gareth put his arm around her. "Everything we need is still breathin'." The clouds broke just enough for the moon to shine down on the three of them, 2 fugitives and a newborn risen from the ashes. He looked at the child, then at the smoke rising over Red Hollow Pass. "This ain't the end," Gareth said. "This is the start of a war." Redbute's courthouse had never held so many people in one place without a gunfight breaking out, not yet anyway. They came from every ridge and canyon, every mine shaft and creek bed, men with soot-stained hands and women in threadbare shawls, all shoulder to shoulder under a high-arched ceiling with peeling paint and a judge who looked too nervous to sit still. The crowd spilled out the doors and onto the steps, murmuring like a storm rolling in slow. At the center of it all, seated behind a worn oak table with a marshal on either side, sat Gareth Langston, rough, grim, with dust on his boots and dried blood still under his fingernails. He wore no shackles, but the tension in the room held him tighter than any chain. The charges, read aloud by a man with more badge than backbone, echoed like gunshots: abduction of a female citizen, incitement of violent unrest, theft of company property. Company property. That was how they framed Odessa. What will become of Gareth and Odessa? Gareth didn't flinch, just watched the gallery, because he knew who was behind it. At the rear of the chamber, perched like a vulture in fine wool, sat Isaac Bareric, silver-haired, clean-shaven, his eyes cold and calculating. Around him sat 3 councilmen, 2 bankers, and a pink-cheeked minister who'd long forgotten how to pray. It was a show trial, a message, and Gareth knew exactly how it would end, unless he ended it first. Under his coat, tucked inside a folded envelope, lay the last card in his deck, the ledger copy, signed and notarized by Sheriff Coyle before he bled out on that office floor. Attached was a letter addressed to Alice Ryman, Denver Tribune, already mailed, already out of reach. But still, Bar Eric had a plan. A hired gun sat in the upper balcony, dressed like a ranch hand, his face unremarkable. He never looked at Gareth directly, but the barrel of the sawed-off under his coat pointed one way all morning. One shot, one accident, and they'd clear the body, seal the record, and bury the truth in legal dirt. Then came a sound no one expected. The courthouse doors swung wide, and Odessa Wayne stepped through. Gasps rippled through the chamber. She wore a worn blue dress and boots caked in mud. Her hair was braided, her posture straight, and in her arms, swaddled in a wool blanket, lay the baby, his dark eyes wide, silent, and staring into a room full of wolves. The gallery parted. She walked down the aisle without a word, past the whispering jurors and crooked councilmen, past the rifleman who faltered just enough to give Gareth a second chance. Odessa stopped in front of the judge, turned, and faced Bar Eric. Her voice was calm, clear, unshaken. "This child," she said, "is yours, Isaac Bar Eric. Are you gonna kill him too, like you tried with me? Like you did with everyone else who got in your way?" Gasps turned to growls. The judge's gavel trembled in his grip. "This is it, one way or the other everything is on the line," Odessa asked. "Are you gonna kill him too, like you tried with me? Like you did with everyone else who got in your way?" Bar Eric's jaw tightened, but it was too late. The room exploded in noise, not chaos, not gunfire, but anger. Truth. The crowd surged, miners shouting, farmers rising, someone grabbed a councilman by the collar, and the minister backed out the door. The judge disappeared. And Bar Eric stood, his hand twitching toward his coat. That's when it happened. A single gunshot, sharp and sudden. Bar Eric stumbled, then fell, a red bloom spread across his chest as he collapsed backward over the bench. Screams echoed, but no one moved. No one saw where the shot came from, and no one needed to, because justice didn't always wear a badge, and sometimes the town took care of its own. When the smoke cleared, Gareth stood beside Odessa. The baby still hadn't cried. By dusk, half the courthouse was in flames and the other half was in custody. Dozens of names pulled from the ledgers led to resignations, trials, and disappearances. The mine shut down, the mayor fled, and Redbute began to change. Months later, the land that once held Gareth's burned ranch grew new life. Langston's Bluff was rebuilt, not just as a home, but as a haven. They called it the Crossing House, a place where no woman walked in alone and walked out the same. Odessa ran it like a general, and Gareth worked the land. The baby, now named Jonas Wayne Langston, grew stronger by the day, quiet but keen-eyed. People sent children, runaways, widows, and girls from mining towns with bruises hidden under their sleeves, and no one ever asked what brought them there, only what they needed next. In a letter to Alice Ryman, now published and read across half the territory, Odessa wrote, "We weren't saved, we were chosen. And this child, he'll never grow up quiet. He'll grow up knowing that the law isn't a star on a chest, it's the fire you keep burning in your gut for what's right." Redbute still whispered about that courthouse day. Some said the shot came from the balcony, others swore it was the ghost of Sheriff Coyle, but Gareth didn't care, because some debts are paid in silence, and some legacies are written in blood and dust and the eyes of a child who saw everything and chose to stay. Analysis and final message. A lonely rancher won a pregnant woman in a poker game. What happened next stunned the entire town, breaking away from the tired tropes of Western storytelling, offering something far more intimate and unsettling, not a romance, but a reckoning. This isn't a tale of love born from passion, it's the story of two broken souls, a silent rancher and a hunted woman bound not by fate but by survival, trust, and eventually, purpose. There is no damsel in distress, and no hero in shining spurs. What we get instead is a hard-earned partnership forged in fire and silence. The true villain here is not a gunslinger with a bounty or a renegade outlaw, but a corrupt system, a mining empire that treats lives like commodities, and a town too scared to stand up. In that way, the story taps into a deeper historical fear of the Old West, that the line between law and lawlessness was drawn not by morality, but by money. And yet, the ending doesn't linger in revenge, it pivots toward rebirth. The courthouse isn't just the stage for justice, it's where the lies collapse and where the town finds its spine again. Odessa and Gareth don't ride off into the sunset. They build something lasting from the ashes. At its heart, this story reminds us that family isn't who you're born to, it's who you choose to fight for. The West wasn't just won with bullets, it was reclaimed by the quiet bravery of the broken. Sometimes the greatest rebellion isn't pulling a trigger. It's raising a child in truth. In an age of noise and spectacle, Lonely Rancher delivers its revolution in whispers through a woman's